We talked a lot yesterday, didn't we, about what was going on in Washington. We were seeing it appeared as if it was a reframing of the global economic and political order. Well, of course, by the time that the sun set over the Potomac yesterday, things started to look a little bit differently, certainly with regards to all of the tariffs that we were talking about. Gone were the proposed tariffs, or postponed or deferred in any case, were the proposed tariffs from the Trump administration on Mexico first, and then by the end of the day on Canada as well, postponed for 30 days after positive conversations, apparently, phone calls between Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, Trump, and Claudia Sheinbaum, the President of Mexico. Trump claims that they've agreed to do various things that he wants, and so they'll be postponed. For now, different leaders in Canada and Mexico have rather different interpretations of it, but that's by the by. We can return to that at another juncture. There were other things going on in Washington yesterday, though, in the United States. And in some ways, I think they were far more significant, certainly given now the tariffs have been proposed. And this all connects with the, potential transformation that we're seeing of the US federal government led by efforts, of course, by none other than now President Trump's close confidant, advisor, and of course just so happens to be the world's richest man, Elon Musk. We hinted and talked about this a little bit yesterday with the changes being made to US aid, the US aid program. But these changes are being applied to the wider federal democracy as well. He's tightening his control over broad swathes, it's New York Times saying this, over broad swathes of the United States government at extraordinary speed, which is prompting growing alarm from Democrats and other constitutional scholars and others. In the 2 weeks since President Trump's inauguration, Musk, heading up the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, is transforming the federal bureaucracy, prompting questions about the scope of his authority and warnings from some of a constitutional crisis or even a coup. Bear in mind, he is doing this without the oversight of the Congress, their equivalent of Parliament, and Musk and his people have been going into these buildings, going in, seizing control of the buildings, taking control of the security networks inside, taking away the people who work there, their security passes, and so on, have shut down the US main foreign aid agency, which is going to take away aid for tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, $40 billion altogether of US federal aid around the world, one of the biggest international aid donors in the world. They've gained access to classified material and sensitive details. This is Musk and his people who've just gone into these federal agencies and seized sensitive detail about millions of Americans, including taking control of a payment system that manages the flow of trillions of dollars of government spending. Musk has been named as a special government employee by the White House, but of course he does not hold elected office. He's not part of Trump's cabinet, whose members require confirmation by the US Senate, and he does not have an official government position as such. Richard Painter, who served as the chief White House ethics lawyer, has said, in previous administrations, including Republican administrations, so Republican guy, has said, I've never seen anything like this. Never in the history of the country. We always have the president and the cabinet and the Treasury Secretary confirmed by the Senate. Cabinet members are installed by the president. They coordinate with the White House. You can't just not spend money appropriated by Congress. So we have something completely unusual, unorthodox going on in Washington. You're having the government itself being reshaped, and as I repeat, going up to and including payment systems worth trillions of dollars being basically handed over to Musk, who is a unelected official, not even an official, someone without confirmation by the institutions, but also over whom there is very little to no oversight right now. We do not know what he is doing, in whose name apart from Trump, and under what authority he's doing it, other than Trump's authority that we are not sure that Trump himself even has. And why is he doing it? Well, he says he's doing it because he wants to slash government bureaucracy. He wants to transform the US federal government, which spends trillions and trillions of dollars a year, and he wants to cut it by a third, by $2 trillion of a total federal government budget of $6 trillion. He says, Musk that is, that requires tough surgery, tough love. He wants to go in and transform it. Now, whether he'll be able to do that or not is a separate question that we might get into. Question, I suppose, that I want to talk to you about is whether or not we should be very, very worried about this. There are some people calling it a coup, the fusion between MAGA, political power, and technological power in the form of Musk, someone who is already plugged into our brains at all times. Certainly if you're on one of his platforms, he might be able to buy TikTok. Trump might allow him to buy TikTok. That would give him even more informational power to be able to feed the ideas that he has in his head into our brains. And we've seen how that's worked out with British politics over the last month or two, doing, among other things, endorsing and suggesting that Tommy Robinson is a political prisoner. Some complete nonsense, of course. Insulting Jess Phillips, calling her a child genocide apologist, and so on and so forth. So we've plenty of misinformation. So he might be about to become even more powerful still, which matters to us. But then there's the question, I suppose, and maybe you think this, maybe in order to get to grips with bureaucracy, in order to get to grips with a government that never seems to stop expanding, in order to get to grips with huge vested interests in the form of the bureaucracy that there is, and there is lots of vested interests there, maybe you need someone like Musk. Maybe you need someone who is that innovative. Maybe you need someone who is willing to break some eggs in order to make that omelette. And my word, is he breaking eggs left, right, and centre right now. What is Elon Musk? Is he a coup with a Twitter account, a walking coup with a Twitter account, or is he an innovator and someone we need an equivalent of in this country to get to grips with UK government bureaucracy? 0345 6060973, 0345 6060973. First, let's talk to Bruce Daisley, former Vice President of Twitter for Europe, Middle East and Africa, is a very keen Musk watcher. Bruce, this is unprecedented, isn't it?
Yeah, well, firstly, we know exactly the playbook he's using because he used exactly the same playbook when he finally took over Twitter. And he went through the same stages. He moved people into the buildings, and apparently he's taken up residence across the road from the main building he's based in Washington. He's working all weekend, and he talked this weekend about the advantage that gives him over his adversaries. And that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? The idea that he's at war with the people who he's now running is an illustration of how deep-rooted this sense of a deep state has polluted the thinking of people like Musk, that they think that somehow the government and government machinery is somehow in opposition to normal people. So yeah, we've witnessed this playbook before, but it is completely remarkable, I think, for a democratic country.
He's been going in, and there's been a lot of concern, hasn't there, that he's getting access to federal government payment systems, which are potentially worth huge amounts of money, and information that he might have access to over which there is no one really looking over his shoulder and asking why has he got access to that and what is he going to do with it.
And the real strange conundrum at the heart of this is that people who've then gone on and announced and promoted the team who were working with him, and by all accounts, they seem to be young people under the age of 25, people who've announced their names, he's told people tweeting their names out that they're committing a crime. In the sense, say, the people who are shining a light and putting sunlight on what he's doing, he seems to have a sense that he wants to keep that private while wanting to unearth whatever payments we're going to find in this colossal bank of financial transactions. So it's very strange. He seems to want this asymmetry of information. He wants everything he does to be private and everything that the government does to be public. All of it seems, you can understand why politicians in the US are feeling that there's reason to be alarmed here, because there just doesn't seem to be any way to hold him to account for what he's doing.
What do you think he wants, Bruce? I mean, he already has access. He's already got huge power and influence over Trump. He's got huge power and influence via Twitter, his tech platforms. He has huge power, influence, and money that derives from his wider business interests. What more does he want? What does he want at this point?
He seems to focus when it comes to his disruptive instincts. He seems to focus first and foremost on dismantling, and he dismantled Twitter when he took over. He sacked about 80% of the employees in the end, but did it in a graceless and quite aggressive way. And you might say, okay, well, Twitter's still going, but the X platform that it's now called, is smaller, poorer, and worse than it was before. So I don't think anyone could say, even he can't say, he emailed employees last week saying that the business was on the verge of bankruptcy. I don't think even he would say that it's a success story. And yet he's brought this same playbook to what he's doing at the government here. And I think he just wants to disrupt by dismantling, really.
But I mean, surely, I mean, that's potential huge risk for that. I mean, the US federal government, I mean, Twitter's important, it was important, but ultimately, we can all live without Twitter, right? Lots of people have left the platform. It does not need to exist. The US federal government does things like, providing people with pensions, providing people with benefits, providing people with healthcare, defense, all of these things that it does around the world. I mean, you can disrupt that, but the potential costs of doing so and it going wrong are potentially massive.
I think we've got used to these oligarchs seeming removed, living in rarefied air, not necessarily being connected to what's going on. But there seems to be something singular about Musk, where he appears to have no empathy whatsoever. So whether that is the way that he has singled out individuals, people who either have worked for the government or worked for his other companies, the way he's singled out other individuals without understanding the consequence of his actions. He's the most followed person on his social media platform, and yet he's very willing to turn the 220 million followers that he's got on often pretty small people who just are normal citizens living their lives. His lack of empathy, I think, really even distinguishes him versus the other oligarch class, really.
Do you think we should be worried in Britain? I mean, obviously, this is happening to the US federal government. There isn't a direct implication. Do you think we should be worried about this, Bruce? About the way he's handling things?
Right now, there doesn't seem to be any consequence for any of his actions. And that presents a big challenge, doesn't it? The idea that he might interfere in British democracy by giving $100 million to one party. Political parties seem a little bit flat-footed. They don't want to mention it. They don't want to bring it up for fear he actually goes through with it. And it's an illustration, really, that a lot of people don't necessarily know how to deal with Musk. I suspect the only way that we can deal with him outside the US is in solidarity, whether it's the UK and the EU making comments about his international actions or demonstrating the similar commitment that the likes of Brazil showed when they said, these are our laws and we're going to implement them. And I suspect the only way we could probably hold Musk accountable here is to say that there's going to be cross-contamination. Anything he does wrong at one of his businesses, we do reserve the right to hold his other businesses responsible. Because otherwise, what can any of us do? And I think that's the challenge outside the US. In the US, I think it's a much bigger issue. The US Republicans have got control of all three parts of government, and so for the next 2 years at least, it's very difficult to see serious account being held of them.
Do you think there's any possibility? Let's just take a step back here and just ask the question: is there any possibility he succeeds? I mean, could he actually? I mean, as you know better than anyone, Bruce, there are people online who are such Musk devotees, the Musk fanboys, as I call them. They absolutely adore him, and they say, he's the most gifted, industrious person to have ever lived. And indeed, clearly, he's a genius in lots of ways. But do you think there's any prospect that we get to the end of this period, however long Doge is there for, and indeed he has cut the US federal government budget by a third, by $2 trillion, that he'll succeed?
I don't think it's clear what his end is in mind. I don't think it's clear what he wants to accomplish. If there was a version of a plan that he was trying to say that everything would operate more effectively, then I think you could understand that. It's only 18 months ago that he was sitting at that little fireside chat with Rishi Sunak, saying that long-term, the promise of artificial intelligence was that everyone in society would be given a minimum basic income. Everyone would be given a sum of money by the government to survive. Now, that's not a government minimalist, but it's an illustration that I don't think there's a consistent cohesive argument right at the center of what he's doing. In the same way he did with Twitter, he turned it from being a 5 billion turnover business into something that's about a quarter of that. I don't think this man has a plan. I just think he's an individual who lives without any consequence of his actions catching up to him. And as a result, he's become increasingly whimsical. He's become driven by gut instinct without ever fearing what will happen as a result of his actions.
Bruce Daisley there, former vice president of Twitter, giving us his thoughts on exactly what Elon Musk is up to.